In the dying embers of World War II, 1,000 stories were buried beneath signatures, sealed reports, and falsified communiques. Some were too dangerous to tell, others too inconvenient to remember. But in the archives of fading powers and forgotten regimes lie fragments, coded transmissions, redacted field reports, and eyewitness testimonies that refuse to disappear. Among them are records of vanished convoys, missing scientists, and experiments that never reached the history books. These are not legends. They are the shadows left behind by the men who built the war, erased it, and then rewrote its ending. What remains is not the truth, but the silence between the lies. Chapter 1: The Vanished Convoy of Operation Icevale. On the night of February 19, 1945, the Arctic roared with a wind that could strip steel from hull plating. Somewhere north of Trondheim, a formation of 5 vessels under Kriegsmarine Command slipped into the Norwegian Sea under the codename Operation Icevale. Their orders were classified even from most of the officers aboard. The flotilla consisted of one Type 1D2 U-boat, 3 transport ships registered under the Norddeutsche Lloyd line, and an escort destroyer believed to be the Z-33. They were to make for Narvik, officially to deliver prototype radar components, but declassified fragments from the Oberkommando. Der Marine indicate their true destination lay farther north, near the uninhabited Svalbard archipelago. Radio intercepts from Bletchley Park captured portions of the convoy's encrypted traffic before contact was lost. One transmission at 01:37 hours read simply, "Cargo secured, proceeding under Morgenlicht directive." The term Morgenlicht, morning light, does not appear in any known Nazi program index. British naval intelligence later marked it as non-standard codename, potential scientific priority. Within 48 hours, all 5 ships disappeared without distress calls. The Kriegsmarine logbook for February 20th makes no reference to the convoy. Its registry number T432 was struck from the ledger by March, and officers involved were reassigned under disciplinary rotation. 3 weeks later, HMS Vigilant reported radar echoes of unidentified metallic debris drifting southward with the current near Bear Island. When a boarding team was dispatched, they recovered a single crate, its contents burned beyond recognition. The stenciled marking read, Agentum des Heereswaffenamts, Abt E, property of the Army Weapons Office, Section E. Section E's function remains unknown. Its archival designation ends abruptly in 1944. Among the fragments found with the crate were glass-like. Residues fused into the wood. Laboratory analysis described them as vitrified under intense electromagnetic exposure. In 1951, Soviet naval records documented the recovery of an unidentified hull fragment beneath the pack ice near Franz Josef Land. The report, stamped Soвершенно секретно, top secret, identified traces of a German construction alloy used exclusively in U-boat pressure hulls. However, serial imprints on the metal corresponded to no known production batch. Soviet researchers filed their findings under Projekt Zara, Project Dawn, suggesting a connection to energy research undertaken in captured Nazi facilities. The file was sealed by the KGB in 1958 and declassified only in fragments after the fall of the Soviet Union. Those fragments reference non-conventional magnetic phenomena and localized anomalies during salvage. Meanwhile, in the United States, the Office of Naval Research produced an internal document titled Arctic Phenomena, Source Unknown, dated 1952. It referenced radar interference in the Barents Sea matching the coordinates of the last known Icevale transmission. The memo suggested that an unregistered high-frequency pulse had disrupted Allied radio networks in the region for nearly 6 hours. British communications officer Lieutenant Alan Firth testified in a post-war inquiry that the signal bore a rhythmic pattern, consistent with artificial modulation, but beyond any known frequency of German or Allied origin. The inquiry was closed without conclusion. Firth was reassigned to Gibraltar and never spoke publicly again. Decades later, Norwegian fishermen reported unusual readings on sonar near the Surkap Trench, depth anomalies suggesting the presence of large metallic structures. In 1973, a Soviet oceanographic team aboard Vityaz recorded a faint magnetic disturbance at those same coordinates, noting it as consistent with submerged ferrous mass, no biological interference. Attempts to recover samples were called off due to severe weather, though the ship's logs mention intermittent radio pulses in Morse interval, identical to Icefale's last recorded signal structure. A retired US naval cryptographer, Milton Havers, later claimed he was tasked with decrypting transmissions linked to a German Arctic convoy incident while stationed in London in 1946. In an interview shortly before his death in 1988, he recalled a recurring word fragment, Kammlerstufe. Scholars have speculated that this referred to SS General Hans Kammler, the architect behind several secret Reich technologies. If true, it would place Operation Icefall within Kammler's sphere of classified logistics, potentially tied to the relocation of advanced weapon prototypes in the war's final months. Despite renewed efforts by independent researchers, no verified wreckage of the Icefall convoy has ever been recovered. A 2003 expedition by the Norwegian Polar Institute found faint traces of ship metal embedded in glacial ice near Hopen Island, though carbon dating proved inconclusive. The location lies precisely along the route Icefall would have taken if heading toward a known wartime weather station codenamed Kreuzpunkt 47. Yet that station's existence is unconfirmed. Allied maps list the area as unoccupied terrain. In 2010, a partial copy of a Kriegsmarine telegram surfaced in a private archive in Hamburg. It bore the signature of Admiral Karl Dönitz and was addressed to Group North Trondheim Command. The message read, Morgenlicht in transit. Ensure silence under Directive 235B. Final report upon confirmation of contact. Analysts suggest the phrase confirmation of contact implies rendezvous with another vessel or outpost. No record of such a meeting exists in either Axis or Allied documentation. By all conventional measures, Operation Icefall should have been a logistical footnote in the dying months of the war, one of hundreds of desperate relocation efforts to secure Germany's collapsing research infrastructure. Yet every attempt to trace its paper trail ends in redacted archives, missing files, and conflicting testimonies. Even the convoy's manifest, supposedly listing engineering components and technical staff, has vanished from all known records. In 2016, a team of Norwegian divers operating under civilian permit near Jan Mayen Island captured sonar images of a large, elongated structure partially buried beneath sediment. The shape bore resemblance to a submarine hull, approximately 90 meters in length, with external protrusions inconsistent with any Type 1D design. The Norwegian government classified the site as historical wreckage and restricted access under maritime heritage laws. Requests for excavation remain unanswered. There are still those who believe the Icefall flotilla was not carrying weapons or scientists, but a power source, something developed under Project Morgenlicht. Notes recovered from a 1944 SS research conference in Königsberg mention localized field distortion for remote energy transference, a concept decades ahead of its time. If such experiments existed, it would explain the extraordinary secrecy surrounding the convoy's disappearance. The final entry in HMS Vigilance wartime log, dated February 20th, 1945, reads as follows. 1:05 hours. Visual confirmation of unknown vessel. No markings. Moving against current. Silence maintained per standing orders. Contact lost in storm. The log was signed by Captain R.H. Merton, whose subsequent career ended quietly in 1947 with no further postings. His personal diary, auctioned in 1979, contained a single handwritten line beneath that date. It moved without wake. To this day, the official position of the German, British, and Norwegian governments remains identical. Operation Icefall never existed, yet the ocean north of Trondheim tells a different story, one written in magnetic whispers beneath the ice, pulsing at intervals only the dead remember. Chapter 2. Operation Paper Veil, the scientists who never arrived. In the closing weeks of 1945, as the ruins of Berlin smoldered and Allied intelligence units picked through the bones of the Reich, an invisible race began beneath the public victory. It was not for cities or surrender terms, but for minds, the scientists who had built Hitler's war machine and whose knowledge could determine the next century's balance of power. The United States called it Operation Paperclip, the Soviets their trophy brigades. Yet hidden within the bureaucratic fog of captured personnel, an offshoot program emerged, one that would never appear in public record. It was called Operation Paper Veil. The first hints of Paper Veil surfaced not in Washington or London, but in a faded manifest recovered from a US Army airfield near Salzburg, dated June 12, 1945. The document listed 12 passengers under protection of the 17707th Military Intelligence Service Center, bound for destination undisclosed, clearance level exceptional. No aircraft tail number was provided, and the signatures were later found to have been forged. The names, partially legible, included physicists affiliated with the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, a neurologist linked to Luftwaffe hypoxia research, and 2 engineers from Peenemunde's propulsion division. None of them appear in the known paperclip roster. The manifest's final entry was chillingly brief. Flight complete. Cargo secured. No further correspondence. By 1946, most paperclip scientists were being relocated to Fort Bliss, Texas, and White Sands, New Mexico, where they would aid in rocketry and aeronautics research. Yet the Paper Veil group never arrived. Internal memos within the US War Department reference personnel pending secondary review, routed through an entity designated X2 Research Division. That division, according to declassified OSS documents, was a temporary intelligence branch tasked with assessing sensitive human resources of potentially compromising backgrounds. But its facilities and operations vanished by 1947. Only one remaining cable, sent from a liaison office in Vienna, mentions their disposition, packaged to be retained under Project Eden protocol. Project Eden remains one of the Cold War's most elusive ghosts. CIA archival excerpts from 1954 describe it as joint Anglo-American study in extended human endurance under psychological deprivation. Later reports refer cryptically to subject reconditioning for non-conventional environments. What made Paper Veil distinct was not the expertise of its scientists, but their refusal to cooperate. Several were allegedly exposed to Allied interrogations at Camp King near Frankfurt, before being transferred to holding sectors along the Tyrolean border. From there, their trail ends. In 1968, a retired MI6 attaché named Cyril Denham wrote a private letter to a former OSS colleague, Robert Kinsey. Portions of that letter, recovered from Denham's estate after his death, read, "You were right. They never made it to Huntsville. They went underground, literally. The Americans didn't take them. They buried them." Attached was a hand-drawn map showing the Salzburg airfield and a dotted line running toward an area labeled Werkhalle 17, an abandoned Wehrmacht storage depot later repurposed by Allied occupation forces. Austrian authorities who investigated the site decades later discovered sealed chambers beneath the depot, reinforced concrete corridors lined with air vents and electrical wiring of post-war origin. Radiation tests detected no anomalies, but the layout suggested habitation. Local rumors claimed American trucks had entered the site nightly for weeks after the war, only to vanish before sunrise. In 1949, a short-lived congressional inquiry into post-war human experimentation mentioned a restricted test series conducted in cooperation with British medical officers. Though the report was heavily redacted, the unredacted fragments align with Project Eden's description. Tests concerned with neural fatigue and cognitive breakdown thresholds. Subjects: foreign nationals, unregistered. None of the participants' identities were disclosed. The Oversight Committee was dissolved the following year. Its chairman, Senator Hugh Manning, died of a stroke 6 months later. His notes on the hearings were destroyed under executive order citing national security necessity. British archives reveal that Paper Veil's shadow stretched across the Atlantic. A memo dated 2nd of February 1950 from the Foreign Office's Northern Department includes the line, "Further transmission of the Denham packet prohibited. Maintain silence regarding Eden Compliment." The Denham packet has never been located. Rumors persist that it contained photographs taken at an undisclosed Alpine facility. Images so disturbing that multiple archivists refused to handle them. When MI6 headquarters relocated in 1964, the file known as CX40592, Eden Human Factors Research, was reportedly destroyed in a fire. No insurance claim was filed. By the mid-1950s, Soviet counterintelligence appeared to be aware of Paper Veil's existence. KGB reports recovered after the Cold War refer to a Western operation concerning psychophysiological manipulation of former fascist specialists. The Soviets accused the US of employing experimental interrogation systems adapted from Nazi research on sensory isolation. Western governments denied the allegations, but the sudden deaths of two paperclip scientists, Dr. Karl Taubner and Dr. Wolfgang Reiser, during official questioning in 1953, raised suspicions. Both men had connections to the same institute where the Paperveil group had once worked. Their deaths were ruled suicides. Autopsy reports were sealed. It was not until 1973 that evidence of Paperveil resurfaced, when satellite imagery from the Bavarian Alps revealed remnants of subterranean concrete structures partially collapsed near Garmisch-Partenkirchen. A declassified US Air Force intelligence note referred to these as unidentified containment silos, probable post-war origin. Austrian mining records from 1946 show American requisition orders for heavy drilling equipment in the same region, listed under civilian cover projects. Locals recall military convoys moving through the passes under tarpaulin at night, escorted by men with no insignia. When journalist Thomas Greeley of the Munich Observer began investigating missing Nazi scientists in 1972, he reportedly uncovered correspondence linking a former OSS officer to the Eden Project. He told colleagues he possessed proof that Paperveil existed. Before publishing his findings, Greeley died in a car crash outside Wiesbaden. Police records show no skid marks, no signs of impact beyond a single direct fireburst. His briefcase, containing research notes, was never found. A surviving CIA logistics ledger from 1947 mentions a special transfer under Directive 9A12 to be considered non-repatriable. The file number corresponds to a separate index labeled human material, a term used historically to denote psychological subjects rather than property. Under this entry appear the initials of 12 individuals, matching the names from the Salzburg Manifest. Next to each name is a single word, contained. If the Paperveil scientists were truly held under Project Eden, their purpose remains obscured. Some researchers suggest they were used to develop early methods of sensory deprivation testing, later mirrored in MK-Ultra experiments of the 1950s. Others believe they were subjected to research on cryogenic suspension, referencing documents from the Aberdeen Proving Ground that mention biological latency studies, foreign specimens. Nothing conclusive has ever been verified. The last trace appears in a 1981 CIA archival inventory labeled Decommissioned Operations, Non-Active Assets. Among hundreds of entries, one line stands out. Project Eden, status, terminated. Personnel unaccounted. No closure date is listed. Today, the existence of Operation Paperveil is dismissed by official historians as a conspiracy conflating missing paperclip files and Cold War paranoia. Yet in private collections across London, Washington, and Berlin, archivists still whisper of the names that never made it into the official rosters, the men who built weapons for the Reich and then vanished into a labyrinth of post-war secrecy. Their knowledge may have shaped both sides of the Iron Curtain. But for the 12 scientists listed on that lost Salzburg Manifest, the trail ends not in freedom or prosecution, but in silence. Their destination was not Huntsville, nor Moscow, nor London. It was somewhere in the cold tunnels beneath a mountain, where the war never truly ended, and where science, stripped of nation or morality, disappeared under a new flag. Classified. Chapter 3. The Ghost Network of Operation Harbinger. Between 1948 and 1950, Europe's post-war silence was deceptive. Behind the fragile peace treaties and reconstruction, a covert struggle for control of intelligence networks unfolded like a second war in the shadows. Amid the rubble of Berlin and Warsaw, an Allied directive, quietly authorized under the codename Operation Harbinger, sought to maintain communication lines with anti-Soviet agents trapped behind the newly drawn Iron Curtain. The plan was, desperate but necessary, to activate residual cells composed of former resistance operatives, cryptographers, and ex-Wehrmacht officers now willing to serve the West against Stalin's expansion. But by the summer of 1949, the operation had turned on its creators. The first irregularity surfaced on June 3, 1949, when a wireless operator at MI6's Vienna station intercepted an anomalous transmission originating from East Prussia. The signal, contained familiar call signs used by Allied cells in Poland. But those agents had been captured or executed months earlier. The message repeated in 12-hour intervals, each time using the same code word: Directive Harbinger active. Decryption specialists classified it as a probable Soviet deception attempt. Yet when agents were dispatched to triangulate the signal, they found themselves chasing a moving source, one that seemed to drift through abandoned radio towers and forests once held by German units. By October, the anomaly had escalated. The US Army's Signal Intelligence Service in Frankfurt logged 23 separate instances of the same message, relayed through outdated Allied encryption ciphers long since retired. Each carried subtle variations suggesting human input. The most chilling discovery came from a recovered transmission fragment. Network maintained, awaiting further orders. But none had been sent. MI6 operative Harold Jessup, later debriefed under oath, described the phenomenon as an echo that thought it was still at war. A memorandum dated January 1950 from the Director of Central Intelligence to the British Foreign Office confirms joint concern. The persistence of Harbinger transmissions implies either compromised infrastructure or autonomous relay systems. Immediate audit of network architecture required. The audit found no active equipment remaining. The Allied relay posts had been dismantled 2 years prior, their frequencies reassigned. And yet, the signals continued, precise and deliberate, never deviating from wartime scheduling. In April 1950, Operation Harbinger was officially terminated. The residual cells in Czechoslovakia and Poland were disavowed. Agents were ordered home. Many refused, citing ongoing contact from station controllers still broadcasting orders. Within months, 12 of these agents disappeared. Their last known communications contained fragments of the same eerie phrase: "We are not alone on this line." In the summer of 1951, Soviet counterintelligence, specifically the MGB, reported similar disturbances. A declassified KGB field note dated August 12 described an untraceable Western broadcast emanating from ruins near Königsberg. Investigators dispatched to the site discovered an abandoned Wehrmacht bunker complex wired with functioning radio equipment. The generators were post-war Allied issue, but there was no evidence of occupation. The signal they detected transmitted the words, "Harbinger continues, awaiting extraction." The MGB sealed the site and recorded it under internal file, Delo 472, Prizrak, Case 472, Ghost. NATO archives from 1961 contain an internal NSA memorandum titled Echo Returns. It analyzed the enduring ghost transmissions that persisted from East Prussia through the Baltic frequencies. The conclusion was cautious but unnerving. Possibility of automated signal relay cannot explain continued pattern variation. Source unidentified, may indicate remaining human operators or adaptive system. The memo was classified top secret and circulated only among high-level cryptologic analysts. One analyst, Marion Hollister, would later describe hearing the final 1961 broadcast over shortwave. It was a man's voice, faint, mechanical, repeating a date, April 14, 1945, and then the phrase, Directive Harbinger confirmed, pow. Then nothing. The phenomenon might have ended there, had not events in 1989 rekindled interest. As East Germany collapsed and Soviet forces withdrew, amateur radio enthusiasts in Poland and Lithuania reported picking up phantom transmissions on Cold War-era emergency bands. One message, decoded by a Lithuanian operator, translated roughly to "Orders completed, awaiting retrieval." The transmission matched the Harbinger cipher protocol from 1949, using encryption techniques no longer in practice for 4 decades. When NATO revisited the file after reunification, a working group under SHAPE compiled surviving documents into a classified review titled Post-War Autonomous Networks: The Harbinger Legacy. Within it, analysts proposed 3 theories. The first, that Harbinger's original agents had gone rogue, forming their own network that continued to operate autonomously. The second, that Soviet intelligence had reconstructed the cipher to manipulate Western monitoring systems. The third, and most disturbing, that Harbinger's final transmissions originated from an automated relay designed by Allied cryptographers. To survive total loss of human control, a self-perpetuating machine network built to continue the mission indefinitely. In 1992, a joint Anglo-American expedition examined the ruins of Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, seeking physical remnants of the original Harbinger relay. Beneath a collapsed bunker near Fort Stein, they uncovered a sealed chamber containing antiquated radio equipment linked to underground cables running toward the Baltic coast. Power meters indicated minimal but consistent current flow, decades after the war. The chamber's interior bore no signs of habitation. However, in a dust-coated notebook recovered near the transmitter, one line was legible. Signal integrity confirmed. Maintain loop. The notebook's paper was dated 1957, years after the site's supposed destruction. Attempts to trace the connected cable line led the team to a decommissioned Soviet weather outpost near Svetlogorsk. Inside, they found a PHY secondary relay, a makeshift array using both Western and Soviet components. Though corroded, its switches remained in the transmit position. When activated for testing, the relay emitted a faint pulse on 6.62 MHz, the same frequency used in the last known Harbinger broadcast. Within minutes, NATO listening stations across Europe reported identical bursts repeating at regular intervals. Then, abruptly, the signals ceased. The incident was classified, and all equipment recovered from the site was transferred to GCHQ for analysis. The official report concluded that residual current in corroded circuits could have triggered the broadcast, an explanation most experts privately dismissed. A second, sealed appendix allegedly contained more troubling data. Audio fragments of human speech buried within the signal's static. The fragments, once amplified, contained intelligible English words. Directive complete. Awaiting extraction. In 2007, Kaliningrad local authorities discovered the body of a retired Soviet radio technician, Sergei Antonov, who had worked for the MGB in the 1950s. Among his possessions was a small notebook filled with coded entries. One line, translated, read, "The old voice returns every winter. Same time, same frequency. They think it's dead, but it listens." No one has ever identified the original author of the Harbinger transmissions. Some historians argue that they were simply the product of overlapping post-war espionage frequencies. Others insist that remnants of the network still exist, dormant until activated by unknown signals. What remains undeniable is that somewhere in the static between nations and decades, a ghost network once whispered across divided Europe. Its operators long dead, its purpose long forgotten, yet its voice repeating a single command from a war that never truly ended. Awaiting extraction. Chapter 4. The Silent Ruins of Project Valkyrian. By late 1944, as Germany's defeat loomed inevitable, the Reich turned inward. Its remaining scientific divisions ordered to divert all surviving resources toward the so-called Wunderwaffe, or miracle weapons, buried deep within the Harz Mountains of central Germany. A project existed that even many within the SS technical branch had never heard of. Its codename was Project Valkyrian. What little is known today comes from a mosaic of captured documents, Soviet field notes, and testimonies gathered from Allied engineers who stumbled upon the site in the war's final weeks. Together they sketch the outline of something extraordinary and terrifying. The first trace of Valkyrian appears in a requisition order dated August 2nd, 1944, signed by SS General Hans Kammler, chief overseer of the V-2 rocket program and numerous underground armament works. The order demanded urgent transfer of 20 Heeresgruppen engineers and 5 physics specialists from Peenemünde to Zone 29 G, under protection of Sicherheitsdienst convoy. Zone 29 G corresponded to a restricted sector within the southern Harz range, near the village of Elrich. According to Allied mapping, this was the location of a subterranean complex identified post-war as Mittelwerk Süd. but a subsection designated Werk Zedberg does not appear on any construction blueprints. Soviet reconnaissance later listed it as facility unaccounted, heavy voltage infrastructure detected. When the US 10th Armored Division captured Nordhausen in April 1945, they found miles of tunnels littered with slave labor corpses and half-assembled rockets. Yet deep patrols into the southern shafts were halted after encountering collapsed sections radiating unusual heat. A debriefing report by Captain Thomas H. Ralston, marked Confidential, Operation Eclipse Annex C, describes sections of vitrified rock consistent with exposure to sustained electrical discharge beyond conventional weapon range. Engineers accompanying the unit noted traces of copper cabling thicker than standard V2 circuits, disappearing into sealed concrete barriers. Behind one such barrier, they heard what Ralston called a steady humming, mechanical but unidentifiable. The barrier was demolished with shaped charges 2 days later. Nothing was found beyond it, only melted steel supports, pooled like wax. In May 1945, Soviet advance units entered the region independently. Red Army engineers recorded discovery of a collapsed experimental hall, estimated diameter 120 meters. Its floor fused into a glassy surface. Samples taken back to Moscow were analyzed by the Central Institute of Materials. Their internal memo, declassified in 1993, states, "Composition unknown, not results of explosive combustion. Suggest exposure to directed electromagnetic field exceeding 100 megavolt discharge." A separate report to Beria's office speculated the site had been an attempt at field propulsion testing. Stalin ordered the area sealed. The remaining equipment was transported east under Operation Tsvetok 12. Meanwhile, American intelligence began quietly cataloging all references to Valkyrian. OSS technical unit reports from 1946 refer to Kamler's final project, potential non-chemical propulsion or field-based energy transfer. Surviving, German technicians from Peenemünde denied involvement, though one, Dr. Ernst Lauter, admitted under interrogation that Kammler had brought the Black Sun Boys into the caves. Historians generally dismiss the occult associations of the SS's Ahnenerbe division, yet intercepted correspondence between Kammler and Obergruppenführer Wolf mentions aligning test rotation with northern geomagnetic deviation. That phrase reappears in a captured notebook recovered from an electrical engineer, Kurt Baumann, who wrote, "Cycle fails again. Field collapses after 4.2 seconds. Tunnel wall liquefies. Kammler furious." When the US Army consolidated the Harz region under Operation Eclipse, most documents concerning Valkyrian were absorbed by the 10th Technical Command. Colonel James P. Watson, tasked with overseeing advanced weapons capture, filed an interim summary on July 11, 1945. Recovered components indicate large-scale energy experiment, possible attempt to create self-sustaining electromagnetic propulsion or containment. Recommend immediate transfer to US custody under Eclipse Directive 7B. 2 weeks later, the entire cache, including Baumann's notebooks, copper coil fragments, and partial blueprints, was flown to Wright Field, Ohio. There they vanished into a classified repository, later merged with Air Technical Intelligence. Publicly, the facility was catalogued as miscellaneous metallurgical samples. Decades passed before anyone outside classified circles heard of Valkyrian again. In 1977, seismic sensors installed in Lower Saxony detected periodic subsurface tremors, small, rhythmic, precisely timed at 24-hour intervals. Geological survey teams attributed them to mining activity, but cross-reference of the coordinates revealed they aligned with the old Werk Zedberg sector. Local folklore had long spoken of the underground sun, rumors of tunnels glowing at night during the war. Villagers claimed Allied troops sealed the entrances with explosives, and that sometimes in winter, steam still rose from the ground. Declassified East German Stasi documents confirmed that the GDR conducted its own clandestine investigations in the 1960s. Report, Acta V4W1, describes magnetic interference disrupting navigation instruments near Elrich Sud and unexplained radio noise consistent with high-frequency discharge. Stasi technicians found an old power conduit extending beneath the forest, lined with copper piping and primitive ceramic insulators. It terminated in a massive circular chamber collapsed inward. Radiation levels were normal, but compass needles spun erratically. The chamber's floor bore scorch marks in concentric rings, as though from intense rotational force. After reunification, Western archaeologists surveyed the area under the pretense of documenting wartime labor camps. Unofficially, they were accompanied by personnel from the Bundesnachrichtendienst and NATO's shape engineering branch. Ground-penetrating radar revealed deeper cavities beneath the known tunnel systems, their architecture inconsistent with 1940s excavation methods. Attempts to drill exploratory shafts were halted when magnetic sensors overloaded. Locals reported power outages and interference in nearby radio frequencies during the operation. The official reason for halting the dig was geological instability. Among the recovered relics displayed briefly at the Nordhausen Museum in 1998 was a corroded metal plate inscribed with the word Valkyrian and a 7-digit serial number. Within weeks, the artifact was removed for restoration and has never been seen again. Museum staff later admitted the removal was conducted by government contractors who provided no identification. The curator's notes mention faint burn marks on the plate's underside, as though from electrical arcing. A more enigmatic clue emerged in 2005, when a retired American engineer named Henry Lasker revealed he had worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base during the late 1940s. Lasker claimed he was shown fragments of a German magnetic engine salvaged from an underground facility. He described copper spheres arranged in a hexagonal pattern around a shattered core of translucent material that gave off residual charge when touched. He was told to classify all notes under V files. Valkyrian sample, his superior, a former OSS physicist, told him, "These are not weapons, they're experiments in gravity." Lasker's testimony, though unverifiable, mirrors technical terms found in Bauman's notebooks now held in partial scans at the US National Archives. If Valkyrian had succeeded, or even approached functionality, it would have represented a leap far beyond wartime technology. Yet perhaps it never worked at all, consuming lives and resources in a last act of madness. The vitrified rock and magnetic distortions might simply mark catastrophic power failures. Still, one detail defies easy dismissal. In 1946, British reconnaissance aircraft conducting post-war mapping photographed faint concentric scorch patterns on the surface above the Harz Tunnel region. Rings 200 meters wide, visible only in infrared. The patterns faded by 1949. The negatives are preserved in the Imperial War Museum, labeled thermal anomalies, unexplained. Today, the entrances to the Valkyrian complex are sealed under concrete and declared hazardous. Unmarked fences encircle parts of the forest. Trespassers are warned of unstable mines. Satellite thermal imaging, however, continues to register minor but consistent heat signatures beneath the ground, precisely where Captain Ralston recorded his steady humming 80 years ago. Whether mechanical echo, trapped geothermal vent, or the final pulse of a forgotten experiment, no one can say. What remains certain is that in the last convulsions of a dying Reich, somewhere beneath the Harz Mountains, men tried to summon power from the invisible forces of the earth, and when they failed, the mountain itself was left whispering with electricity. Chapter 5. The Cold Files of Division 9. In the chaotic aftermath of 1945, the Allied powers celebrated victory, but their intelligence services were already fighting a different kind of war. One fought not for conquest, but for control of truth. Amid the rubble of Nuremberg's courthouse and the disbanded occupation tribunals, a new unit was quietly born within the US Army Counterintelligence Corps. Its official name never appeared in any public ledger. Internally, it was referred to as Division 9. Its stated purpose was the documentation and prosecution of Axis war crimes. Unofficially, it existed to erase them. The origins of Division 9 trace back to an internal memorandum dated January 19, 1946, signed by Brigadier General Theodore Blake, Chief of G2 Intelligence. The memo, recovered decades later through a Freedom of Information request, established a special review section for the identification, retrieval, and control of compromised war records and personnel of exceptional strategic value. The section's temporary headquarters were located within the former Reich Ministry of Justice building in Nuremberg, ironically, a few hundred meters from the International Military Tribunal. Their orders were classified under Directive R12, Historical Neutralization. Early operations suggest the group was composed of both American and British officers, including veterans of the OSS and MI5. The unit's insignia never appeared on uniforms. Its first mission, File Consolidation 47A, targeted the archives of the SS Economic and Administrative Main Office, which contained detailed documentation of forced labor and camp experiments. When investigators returned weeks later, nearly 1/3 of the files were gone. Replacement volumes, typed on fresh Allied issue paper, carried identical headers but omitted names, unit numbers, and entire operations. The official record would henceforth show the destruction of documents due to water damage incurred during capture. In 1947, Division 9 moved its base of operations to Frankfurt under the cover of the newly formed Office of Military Government, OMGUS. The move coincided with a surge of repatriation requests from the Vatican's rat lines, clandestine escape channels aiding former SS personnel. Division 9 did not oppose these networks. Instead, it monitored and occasionally facilitated them. A declassified State Department cable from February 1948 states, Division 9 providing oversight of priority transfers via Italian ecclesiastical channels. High-value exfiltrations to remain unacknowledged. Attached to the cable was a handwritten note. Keep Argentina option open. British may follow suit. By 1949, the Cold War had hardened into ideological concrete. War criminals once condemned as monsters were reclassified as potential assets. Division 9's new directive was clear: secure any individual whose knowledge could benefit Western intelligence and erase their past in the process. A list found in the papers of a deceased counterintelligence officer, Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Holt, titled Operation Phoenix Retainments, names 27 such individuals, chemists, interrogators, and doctors from occupied territories. Next to each name appeared the notation RA, shorthand for Reintegration Approved. When the German Federal Republic was established that same year, several of those names appeared in the rosters of newly formed intelligence and medical institutions. Not one was ever tried. Reports from British archives paint a darker picture. In an unredacted portion of MI6's 1951 Memorandum Foreign Activities, Zone West, Division 9 is referred to as the janitors of history, cleaning what must never be seen. The same file mentions a joint suppression initiative involving captured Allied field reports, documenting improper experimental procedures conducted by Western units during liberation operations. Among those allegedly suppressed was an incident involving the US 3rd Medical Battalion near Ohrdruf concentration camp, classified under the code Operation Mercury. Surviving correspondence between Army Surgeon General Norman Kirk and Division 9 suggests evidence from Mercury was transferred to sealed storage at Fort Detrick. The record ends there. By the mid-1950s, Division 9 had metastasized into a self-contained intelligence body, existing parallel to the CIA but with no public oversight. Its Frankfurt offices operated out of a nondescript former bank at Kaiserstrasse 72, whose basement vaults were rumored to hold confiscated Gestapo files. An internal US Army audit conducted in 1957 discovered missing property records, unaccounted personnel transfers, and several temporary detainees who were never logged out of custody. The audit's conclusions were redacted in full. The unit's commanding officer at the time, Colonel William Grayson, resigned abruptly and disappeared while en route to Washington. His body was never found. The British Foreign Office became aware of Division 9's existence through intercepted communications in 1959. A cable from London to Bonn reads, "Advise immediate cessation of unsanctioned cleanup ops. International exposure risk unacceptable." American officials replied simply, "Directive R12 remains active. Containment ongoing." That same year, several warehouses outside Wiesbaden caught fire, destroying thousands of captured German documents. Local police listed the cause as electrical malfunction. Witnesses reported unmarked military trucks at the site hours before the blaze. When journalist Thomas Greeley began investigating Division 9 in 1971, he believed he had uncovered evidence linking the unit to disappearances of former SS medical officers who had become informants for the Americans. His articles in the Frankfurt Herald detailed financial trails leading to shell companies registered in Luxembourg and Zurich, all tied to recovery and repatriation funds. Greeley's research culminated in a dossier labeled The Cold Files, a collection of photocopied memos, telegrams, and photographs showing US and British officers escorting unnamed prisoners through Frankfurt airfields in 1946-47. Before he could publish the full series, Greeley was found dead in a burnt-out Volkswagen on the outskirts of Wiesbaden. The police concluded it was an accident caused by a fuel leak. The photographs vanished. In 1975, a congressional subcommittee known as the Church Committee briefly reviewed allegations of unacknowledged post-war intelligence activities in Europe. One entry, still partially classified, refers to Counterintelligence Group 9, probable involvement in war record manipulation and forced disappearances. The report was shelved without follow-up. Decades later, historian Dr. Helen Moore obtained fragments of a related hearing transcript that included the statement, "Division 9 handled files the world wasn't ready to read." When Moore attempted to access the sealed annex through the National Archives, she was informed the file had been permanently recalled to department custody. In 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union unearthed corroborating material. KGB File 772, titled Shadow Cleaners, described a Western intelligence unit responsible for removing compromising evidence of Allied misconduct during occupation. Soviet analysts claimed to have intercepted one of Division 9's final transmissions in 1962, an encoded message reading only, "Closure phase initiated. Burn all duplicates." The following year, several senior CIC officers were quietly retired, and the name Division 9 disappeared from internal rosters. Survivors who allegedly worked with the unit have provided fragmented recollections. One former translator, under anonymity, told a German documentary crew in 1999, "We thought we were protecting the world from lies, but we were protecting the lies from the world." He described a vault known as the Black Room, beneath the Frankfurt headquarters, containing sealed boxes marked "Evidence Not for Release." Each crate bore both Allied and German insignia. He claimed to have translated one file labeled Camp L47, American Study Group, 1945. The document contained clinical notes written in English, describing subject exposure to high-altitude decompression for endurance metrics. The translator was dismissed within weeks. Today, no official record of Division 9 exists. Its paper trail was deliberately fragmented among Army, CIA, and State Department archives, each claiming incomplete jurisdiction. The few surviving documents remain so heavily redacted, they resemble black pages punctuated by stray words: containment, transfer, reintegration. Yet their impact lingers. Many of the men once cleared under Directive R12 went on to shape Western biomedicine, aerospace, and intelligence infrastructure. Their pasts remain scrubbed clean, their crimes erased by those who claim to seek justice. And so, the legacy of Division 9 endures not as a unit, but as an absence, a hollow space in history where accountability should have been. In sealed vaults beneath Frankfurt, in warehouses mislabeled as archival overflow, and in diplomatic cables still buried under classified indefinite, the ghost of Division 9 waits quietly. Its motto, found scribbled on the back of one surviving personnel roster, perhaps says it best. History belongs to the survivors, not the witnesses. The deeper one digs, the less certain the truth becomes. Beneath every declassified file lies another sealed folder, another missing name, another story scrubbed from the record. The war may have ended in 1945, but its ghosts never left. They merely changed uniforms, switched sides, and rewrote their orders. Somewhere, in the archives that governments still refuse to open, the remainder of these stories waits, half burned, half forgotten, yet still breathing in the silence of classified vaults. Perhaps one day the locks will break and the light will fall where it was never meant to. Until then, history will remain exactly as Division 9 designed it, incomplete.